So this is on the ds-incubator about a holistic workflow, about the book, what they forgot to teach you about R. Specifically, the section we are covering now is holistic workflow, and today we are going to be covering maybe the most important meetup of the series, which is this idea of project-oriented workflows. But first, I'd like to quickly go, at least mention what we covered last time, and then we're gonna make a little pause to extend on the answer to a question that Monica posed last time, and then we're gonna start officially with the meetup. So last time we covered how to set up our studio so that we always start from a blank slate. That will save you a lot of trouble. We also discussed the idea of restarting R very often so that we start really with a blank slate and not, just by removing objects with the function rm, but then not refreshing your R packages, for example. So in relation to rm, Monica mentioned that when she's working with an R package, sometimes she realizes that creates objects that are also part of the package, but she creates them interactively, and then when she reloads the package, she gets a message asking her to remove those objects, and the suggestion is to use RM as opposed to what the most general advice could be, which is to restart the session. So I had like a feeling, why would that be last time? I think I still have the same feeling, so I'm gonna, but now I'm preparing that I explore the problem a little bit more, pay attention to the message, and I think I'm convinced that that was the issue. So let me show you what basically what the issue was and what I think is happening here. So to demonstrate this issue, Monica expressed that it was when she was working in packages. So we're gonna create a package called ABC somewhere temporary. So ABC, here we go. So that creates a package. So in a moment, that package will be launched by RStudio. It's happening now. So she explained the issue happened when she's working with some R object that she creates interactively, but also exists in the package. So let's create actually a function in the package. Let's call it F. So here we have an R script. And let's create the function F as a function of X that does X plus 1, for example, right? So that's the function. The thing I want to highlight here is the idea of a workflow, which is an idea that is not immediately clear what it means. So for example, here I have created a function. The function, as you can see, I haven't even saved the file. So I'm gonna press Ctrl S to save that file. But notice how my environment, my global environment, does not contain any object. It does not have an F object, my global environment, so R doesn't even know about that function. The workflow that I use, and you're recommended to use if you are building an R package, is to load those objects as if they were part of a package. So not by interactively creating them on the console, but instead by pressing Shift Ctrl L or calling DevTools load all directly. So that loads the entire package. So if I now use call the function F with the number 1, I should get the number 2 because it's using the function in the package. But notice how I still do not have anything in my global environment. So if I wanted to change the function to x times x plus 10, if I want to manifest that change into the function, the workflow that is recommended as a package developer is again to press Shift Ctrl L, which you will know that it will also save the file that I have here. Note that f.r is highlighted in red. So when I press Shift Ctrl L, that tells me that that file will be saved and loads the object. So if I now do f of 1, it will be 11, right? So what happens, the issue that Monica expressed is that sometimes you do something like, okay, let's do 100, and then she presses, or sometimes I also do that. You want to explore that function interactively, so you press Control Enter. That runs that line, but notice now how that F function exists in the global environment. So what's happening here is that there is a problem because the f that comes from the package ABC, that function, if I give it 1, gives me 11. But if I just call the function f that lives in my global environment, if I call it with the same number 1, I get 101. So that's the conflict that we need to solve. So if I press if I try to load the package with Shift-Control-L, now DevTools detects that there is a function f in the space, in the namespace of the package, but also a function with exactly the same name in the global environment. So it's reminding me of that. And the way it's asking me to solve, or it's suggesting I should solve the problem, is by removing the object f from the global environment. So I can do that with rm list equals f. I have to quote this. So if I do that, now I can load the package with no problem. So the question is why the advice is to remove the object with remove list as opposed to restarting the most general advice that would be to restart the R session, which also solves the problem. Well, I think that it is because restarting the session will wipe any other object as well. So if I have created something that is difficult to create and is sitting there in my global environment, just by blindly following the suggestion of DevTools, I would be hurting myself. I would, be removing not only f but also any other potentially valuable object. So that's why I think that the message here suggests to remove the object with rm. And this is an excellent example, I think. So I thank Monica for that, because I do not want to create any hate for the function rm. So there are good uses for rm, like this one, right? And in general, it's better to, very generally, it's better to restart your session, and that's what you will be using most of the time. But occasionally, knowing that rm exists to remove something specifically, then that might be a good fit for your use case sometimes. Do we have any question or comment about this specifically?
Marl, I wanted to ask if you were intending to record already, so that was one question. And then quickly on the RM thing, I don't know if you mentioned this last time, but it's super common for sort of intermediary people to put at the top of their scripts RM, ls, and then like list and then ls, which basically clears your thing. And this is like, to me, a lazy way of doing this, restarting your R, because it doesn't do all of that stuff. So I say that to point out that if you're the type of person that's doing that, I would also strongly suggest that you move on to like just restarting R and not do this RM list ls to get rid of everything on top of your scripts.
Share that sentiment. I see Jackson approving your comment and Alex asking to make a comment or question. Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, I will also second that like rm list equals ls is not great. It is a nice quick way that if nothing is problematic, it can work. But there is a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes in R that RM doesn't always catch. The big one being like any libraries or packages you have loaded, those are still going to stay loaded. So if you're getting something, a namespace conflict from a package you've loaded, that is still going to be a problem. And I just want to quickly point out that if you have altered your .r profile file at all, when you restart R, that will also get loaded. So I know, like personally, I have library tidyverse as part of my R profile because I just want that to get loaded in every time I always use it, right? That can cause a problem for me if I'm trying to do something and I'm getting a namespace conflict with something in tidyverse.
Thanks, everyone. So to answer CJ's prompt, yes, thank you very much for reminding me about recording. This one time I am recording and also sharing my screen, so I'm very proud of myself. But thank you for reminding me because, yeah, that's a very common one that I forget. Okay, so let's move on here to try cover some more new material. But then we come to the point where we need to talk about projects. So one other practice that is quite common to see is to try start your project in a specific directory using the function setwd, which sets working directory. WD stands for that. And usually it is called with some kind of path that I only have, so something that works only in my machine. So that is of course not portable. So if I need to share, my work with someone else, no one will have that path in their computer. So it will work only for me. So the chances that it will break someone else's code is 100%. So obviously there is something out there. So what we see here as an example of that issue is what is considered bad practice. So something that, okay, you attach a package, say ggplot2, you set the working directory to somewhere, and this is the computer of Jenny Bryan. So, say that she has this path in her computer. She's actually working, this suggests that she's working in a project called Foofy, and now she's setting the working directory inside a subdirectory of that kind of Foofy project, and that's a problem. Then she's calling a dataset inside that folder. Then she's making a plot, and then she's saving the output of that plot in a path that is kind of relative to the data folder, to a folder that is called fix, which is a sibling of the folder data. So it's a mess. Of course, this is not how she writes code. This is a bad example for demonstration. So a little less bad, still not great, but a little less bad would be something like this, where, okay, if you really love setwd, and if you really need to, hard code a path that only you have, at least make it easy for other people to change that one line in their script and kind of move forward. So ideally, you would put that line at the very, very top of the script, and you would not set it to a subdirectory of the project. You would set it not to data inside Foofy, you would set it to Foofy. And then any other path could be relative to the root of the project. So Foofy could be here, what we call the root of the project. So that means that the path where we need to reach the data is, explicitly says inside data, look for the CSV file that I'm showing here, right? And same thing here. So now when you need to save the plot somewhere inside the root of the project, you explicitly say, okay, inside fix, save this PNG file. So everything is relative, and it's relative to the root. But wait, because there is something even better than that. So that's like a convention on how you can make life of someone else easier. But the formal definition of project is coming soon. So it's this idea of like a folder that contains absolutely everything that the project needs, including the data. Yes, you may need to duplicate data or figure out some other way to make the project self-contained. The project directory is set to that project folder, to the root of that project folder, and every path is relative to it. So this is pretty much what this code here does, except for this like very ugly path that only one person has and no one else. So it will break someone else's code. But then there is a notion of a project that RStudio provides, because they define an RStudio project as as a specific kind of project where the folder has a specific file that ends, like which extension is rproj, and that thing defines a project and gives you the ability to use some tools, like for example the here package, which allows you to completely remove the need to hard code paths to your own computer, meaning that the project now becomes portable. So that is something that also comes with Git repositories. So if you're not using RStudio projects, but your project is a Git repository because you are using Git, then the here package is clever enough to know that what is the root of the project, because the Git program drops a folder at the root, and that defines the root. So the same code that we saw above is here now, except that there is nothing that a person that you're sharing the code with needs to do to make it run in their computers. It just works. So the combination of a project plus the here package, the only thing it does is sets, it's aware of the root of the project. So basically you construct paths embraced by the here function. And also, like, for extra nicety, instead of using data dash and any directory inside data, you just separate the different components of a path by commas. And the reason why here proposes that is because the dashes are not always, in not every operating system, interpreted in the same way. In some operating systems, you have a backslash, in others a forward slash. So to remove any confusion coming from OS dependent idiosyncrasies, then the here package just proposes to separate the different components by commas. The use of the here package is specifically important when you are working with R Markdown documents. And this is, I believe, a horrible feature of R Markdown, which defines projects, the working directory, not based on the root of the project that contains that file, but instead, and unfortunately, it defines by default, it's changeable, but by default, it defines the working directory as the place where the R Markdown file lives. And that is error prone because, for example, the first line of code here shows, the project that I have here. So the project that hosts this meetup, and this is just for one example, contains a folder. So the root is called ds.what, what they forgot, right? .utf. And it contains a folder 01 holistic workflow, and inside that, there is these files, including, say, shortcuts. So if I wanted to reach that shortcuts.r file in a sane way, I would create, something like this. I would, create a path from the root. If I wanted to follow the normal conventions of a project, I would construct paths from the root of the project. First giving the root the path to the folder, and then the path to the file itself. So I would expect that to work, because I'm just following the conventional definition of a project and just expecting that the paths constructed following that convention would work. Unfortunately, it doesn't, as this error here suggests. And what is going on? Well, what's going on is that inside an R Markdown document, the working directory is defined as the place where the file lives. And because the file that I'm calling that or creating that path from is already inside a subdirectory of my root, then it thinks that the working directory has to be set to that subdirectory and not to the directory. And then you end up with this weird thing where the path kind of, it's anyway, like it's duplicated. It's a whole mess. It just doesn't work. The reason is because the default is set to the document directory as opposed to the project directory. So this solution, again, is the here package. So if instead of using the function path here, I had used the function here, and CJ, I'm going to pause here in a moment, then the path could have been constructed as in a functional way, and it would just have worked. So if I now do the same thing, if I source that file, it just works. It produces output, it does not produce an error. So long story short, the combination between projects and the here package always works. So if you want to be safe, just embrace your paths in the here function. So you simply replace the functions such as path or file.path, and you replace that function with here, and it will work. That's it. Okay, I'm about to talk about Ide support for projects and show you a few tricks, but specifically in RStudio. But I think that what we covered now, up to now, is the most important probably topic of the entire series. So I'm gonna pause here and avoid CJ to violently kick me out of the meeting, and see if we have any comment, any question up to this point. Please go ahead, CJ.
Yeah. I personally don't use the here package very often, but I do understand that in our markdown it can be used because it messes with your directories. Another case of that is that which also messes with your directories. So this is a case where it comes into play a lot. But I'm sorry if I didn't hear you say it, but I think it's like important maybe to explain the difference between an absolute path and a relative path. And where I always start is like with the advice, like please understand what a relative path is and use that all the time. And then here can be like a supplement to that or a replacement for that. But I think it's important to understand what a relative path is and know that ideally is what you're using, especially if you're conforming to this like project style repo or whatever.
Thanks, EJ. Yeah, maybe to demonstrate, because I haven't covered that explicitly, but hopefully a brief example will demonstrate the point that you're making here. So this is an example of an absolute path. An absolute path is, so Jenny here is working on the Fufi project, and the path that she constructed here, for example, is fix/Fufi. So this is a path that doesn't contain the entire information of where the file lives, relative to the root of the computer. It contains the information that you need to find the path relative to the root of the project specifically. So this is relative. So we call this relative because it's relative to, in this case, Fufi. So this is one example of a relative path, something that you need to know that you're in Fufi to be able to find this file. So that's why it's relative. And this entire thing is an absolute path. It encodes every single path, every single folder inside the computer to reach, in this case, the Fufi project. So this is one example of an absolute path, and this is one example of a relative path, and this is another example of a relative path. Would you like to add something here, CJ?
No, that's fine.
Cool, thanks.
That covers the idea.
Also, I mean here, because this is probably the most important thing of the entire series, the idea that projects must be portable. So if you have something that works in your computer and it doesn't work on mine, it just doesn't work. I mean, like, we cannot work as a team. So this is the most important thing. So this is also a good place to remind of the coding help desks. So it is very common that this idea of changing your workflow from whatever it is to a project-oriented workflow will cause some friction in the beginning, just because you are not used to it, right? You're not used to thinking about projects this way. So, I mean, it's nothing to be ashamed of. We all went through that at some point. Sometime, it was the first day I used an RStudio project, or I used the project in general, and that day it didn't feel very good, and it would have been nice to have some support. So we do provide support here. We support each other here at 2 Degrees in many ways. So you can also ask, on Slack, but formally on the coding help desks. So if you feel that you're struggling with this more than you should, it's fine, to feel some friction for 15 minutes, for half an hour, maybe for an hour. But if you're struggling with this idea for longer than that, I encourage you to save yourself frustration and time by just asking someone to block some time so they can work with you one-on-one, maybe for half an hour, maybe for 1 hour, until we nail this down. So please do use the coding help desks. And any other comment here, or shall I move? So let's see, comments or question now, while I move to the other topic. Okay, so the part that I would like to cover now is, okay, we very commonly use RStudio. It's not the only program that people use to interact with R, but it's very common. So I will just assume, when I say IDE, you can think RStudio. So in general, the word IDE means integrated development environment. It's an environment where you can develop code, write analysis and stuff, and everything, single aspect of your work is integrated. So you have, like a little window to access your files. You have a little window to, write source code. You have another little window to run the code. So this is the idea of the whole thing. The whole development environment integrates the different pieces. So that's why, we call an IDE. An IDE and RStudio is just one of those, but let's assume, just to make the speech easier, we just use RStudio. And if you are using a different one, you're welcome to do so. So IDEs are clever because they were designed precisely to work with code. So they do a lot of the things that you may have done before manually, and you should probably stop doing that, because why would you not use the automation that an IDE provides? So one of the great things that happen when you launch a project, for example in RStudio, is that it sets the working directory to the root of that project, and it restarts R, and it restores open files. So let me show you what that looks like. So here I am in a project, and I know that because here at the top right I have a name as opposed to having something like this. So I'm now closing that project. So you will see that now what appears here on the top right says project none. So I'm not using a project. So I abandoned the project that I had before. But if I launch that project, and I can do that by going to the recent projects, which are available in the file menu, but also here. So from the top right, you control everything that relates to projects. I can go back to the project that was recently used. RStudio memorizes them. And notice what happens. A lot of the things that before you may have done by typing something like set WD and a path that only I have in my computer. So what things happened? Okay, the project is now launched. R has been restarted, which is great, because if you follow the advice from the previous meetup where you ask RStudio, you set it up so that it always starts from a blank slate. You should have nothing here contaminating your R environment. Your global environment should be totally blank. And notice that there is a file here open. It's the same file that I had before. So it restarted the project. So if I ask what's my working directory, it sets. Oops, I forgot to type one letter here. It sets the working directory to the root of the project and recovers our file, recovers files that were open before. So it does a lot of work for you, right? So the other thing that you can do is to launch more than one project. So if before you were using setwd to change your working directory from one project to the other, now you don't need to do that. You can just launch another project. So let me show you here in RStudio how you would do that. Here in this tab, as I showed you before, there is different recent projects that I have. If I click on the name, that would open that project but would close the one that I'm using right now. But if I click on the little arrow here to the right, arrow with that little background, then opens the project in a new R session. So I can have more than one open R session, each in its own RStudio window, as you can see now being open right now. And each process is running in its own environment, in its own in its own session, meaning that an object that I create in one place. So if here I say, okay, create X with the number 10, my global environment here will have that object. Let's see here, environment. X is here, but it is not in here. Here is blank, because these different processes, so everything is completely insulated. So that's great. So I can, and the same benefits happen in the other one, right? So the RStudio opened the project, started in the same session, and set the working directory where it should, and open the files that were recently opened. The last one trick I would like to show you before we call this a meetup is that there is other tools that you may install in your computer to launch projects very comfortably. For example, I installed one program that is called Albert, and Macs and other systems have another program that is called Alfred, and that's the same thing. So for me to launch an RStudio project means hitting Shift and bar and then typing the name of the project. Something like pass data immediately shows options, and I click there, and the project launches. So I'm gonna wait just 1 second to show you how that project launches. So the support that IDEs provide for projects is great. I encourage you to benefit from those. And if you need to refresh what those benefits are, they are listed here in the meetup of today. And what I cover now is the tricks for opening projects. And the last thing that I say is that it's recommended that you would that you could organize all your projects in a folder you can find. Instead of having them spread across your computer, I, for example, keep them all in a single folder that contains all my Git repositories, because usually my R projects are always in Git, being tracked by Git. So okay, that's the end of today's meetup. The next time we're going to talk quickly about naming files and a few other things, but I think we did cover the most important topics of the day. Before I go, any last departing comment or question? All right, happy workflows then. See you next time. Ciao, ciao.
Thank you. Bye.